via like basically just a new route of looking at morals, because once you recognize that moral actions, and what is seen as moral is not quantifiable, it's going to be, interpersonally subjective. As a result, then, maybe we can look at morals a different way. Maybe we can analyze what's moral based on another rule. So for me, I call it moral consistency. I can get into it with you guys personally, as I trust you guys to not, steal my idea for academia, but that's pretty much where I go with it.
Yeah. Okay. So, in other words, you think ethics is based on the coherence, or the intersubjective agreement between individuals, right? It's
to an extent, and it's going to be culturally dependent. So, what's moral in the backwoods of the South? What's moral in New York City? What's moral in African tribal culture is all going to vary, and for the most part, it's going to be consistent in regards to intersubjective agreement as to what's moral. Now, why is the intersubjective agreement in Botswana any less right than the one going on in the ghetto or the suburbs in New York City, for that matter? So who has the moral justification, and what are you making appeal to? Where is this appeal going to, and where is that person or that thing or that individual justification coming from?
But would there be any real way to determine justice when you're talking about two separate cultures sort of banging heads? How do you determine, beyond either culture in particular, what is just in any particular case?
Well, that's the point. If all it is a matter of either intersubjective or personal appeal in regards to the circumstance, and there really isn't much way, or so it seems, to justify the comment. I mean, unless you are Gary and you presume certain values to be static, and those values don't move, and he always has the right ones, then it's going to be hard. You have nothing to make appeal to. You just have to maneuver via personal interest, right? So again, I was arguing with him, and it was, well, his value is that limit suffering, and this is kind of like with anti-Epicurean, right? So limit suffering as much as possible instead of maximizing pleasure. Limit suffering as much as possible. Because in virtue of that, it'll either level out to zero-sum neutrality or some higher number score. So he kind of has that mentality, though. What if your value is my life over all others, or animals are more important, or less conscious animals are more important than more conscious, trees are more important than whatever. And when you start realizing that morals come down to appeal to values, how do you disprove a value? I mean, it just seems kind of nonsensical to even argue the idea.
Right. Well, it seems like it's not about proof at that point. When you're at the level of values,
I think it's about acknowledgement, and there are different value structures. The game, or the funness, or the whatever you want to call it, the puzzle is how they fit together, and is there something to be fit together? That's another way of just questioning our own, but still trying to push on through this.
How about if there's an evolution of these cultures?
That's right.
And the values continually
something that
deepen.
A formula that you can observe through various cultures, and then there it is.
Well, I mean, that's the question. Is there a pattern that you see, Avi, in the way that culture evolves, such that it becomes aware of value in a more, encompassing way than it had in a generation prior?
See, kind of before I became kind of a student to the idea that morals are just these personal creations that then become intersubjective, right? I was desperately trying to group together some kind of moral law that I could find as static, because I just did not want to let it go. That was like my last straw. So I was like, okay, well, what seems to me the only thing that's kind of static across culture is don't kill the innocent. Something very kind of simplistic like that. That's a moral law. It seems kind of static across all cultures. Don't kill the innocent. But when you've done that, you've gone so vague as to render the law meaningless, because that has so many interpretations via culture. Then again, who's innocent, right?
Yeah,
so in the Greek culture,
determine who is innocent, right?
Right. In the Greek culture, you were innocent. You weren't innocent if you weren't able to defend yourself. If you killed someone else's brother, they had the moral obligation to defend themselves. Their brother's death, avenge it against you. And if you're not innocent, if you were unable to defend yourself, you deserve to die. And they were able to take all of your items. I mean, you see this in the Iliad, and you see it in other writings as well. That it was looked upon as you were weak, not you were unjustly attacked. You were weak. You couldn't defend yourself. So innocent is a variant. I mean, it's the variable. What is innocent? And when it's that, when the only moral rule that I can find is that fucking vague, I have to go, game's up, man. Like, what? There's nowhere to go from here.
So in other words, you don't think that there's a way to even begin understanding how culture might develop values as it evolves that are, in a sense, more aware and more focused on attaining justice? You don't think there's any measuring stick, really?
I mean, define more aware, define justice, these kind of ideas. So what is more aware? So are you more aware when you start to, understand how to properly interact with people? Okay, that might be an idea. But what is properly interact? Is punching someone in the face not an appropriate form of interaction? Well, why? And then you have that kind of thing.
Well, John, you probably agree that there are there's developmental psychology, right? And you can recognize a sort of pre-egoic state, an egoic state, and then a more communal state of awareness,
Yeah, I said it before. I mean, when you say what is more aware, I think you're going to have to be the arbiter of that, but there seems to be a logic behind it. Like when the subject of your previous state becomes the object, you're now objectifying that previous former conceiving entity that you were. There's something now. There's a kind of a expansive type of.
Yeah.
So just call that more aware, and under this, that's the context I'm giving you in this sense. So it seems from your own personal experience that you can, if you want to call it conceptually, see what's going on here. It's kind of like a chunk, and you're stepping back and analyzing. You're very objective in this sense.
Right.
But where is this awareness coming from? It seems to be coming from personal interaction. It doesn't seem to be coming from some logical rule we've formulated.
Sure. It's definitely.
And if that's the case, then how is it any more than an appeal to emotion? And the emotion is what's changed over time, rather than some kind of logical awareness.
Well, I mean, what makes you think that emotion is any more real than, as a faculty, a psychological faculty, than reason, intelligence?
Well, it seems to be based on how they are how they operate.
Yeah.
Emotion does seem to kind of operate via just instinctual drive, whereas logic and reason seem to take things into account, and then after the account has been drawn up, something is reasoned out or deduced out or logicized or whatever the whole word you want to use, right? So we gather what we have around us, and then we utilize that in an effort to find some end. Whereas we can pretty much figure out what someone's action was going to be if it was strictly bound by emotional interaction. And the only other thing that I thought was interesting was the comments you guys did on power and authority.
Yeah.
And I thought the distinction that the professor was making was perhaps more emphasized than it should have been for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, first, I should comment, the last end of my comment was, and I'm not seeing this distinction between power and authority in relation to time and space. They both seem pretty properly appropriated with each. I don't know why I use so many fucking P's, but they both do seem to be related to both, depending on how you're looking at it. I mean, authority, for the most part, seems to be a later, something that comes about as a result of the implication of power. Meaning you have your. As I was telling when I talk to anarchists, I'm like, all right, so good. You have your anarchist society. It starts out great. Everyone agrees to do whatever, and you're all in this kind of, intersubjective agreement on what's going to happen and what the rules are and this kind of thing, right? But the second the next group comes out, they're either going to appeal to the authority that's already been set up, in which case it's not really an anarchist state anymore because they need to re-reference, their mentality, because it moves from we all have power. Or we all have authority to appeal to some authority, and it seems to me authority comes about as a result of the submittal to power.
Okay, there's definitely some forms of authority that are dependent upon power, but I think there are. We can sort of separate the two by saying that authority is based on intersubjective agreement. Power is based on it has nothing to do with agreement. It just has to do with who has the ability to force others to do what they want,
Right, but the fact that in one circumstance we're doing it because we don't want to get beaten up, and in the other circumstance we're doing it because we recognize someone as the lawmaker, or it doesn't change the fact that they kind of pragmatically work out the same way. Yeah. With the exception of revolt, that's a bit more uncommon in an authoritative place, right? So the point is, though, that the distinction being drawn that one exists in time and one exists in space because they're different in regards to intersubjective agreement as to what the authority is doesn't seem to play out when you could, for the most part, how can you tell, right? So let's say everyone's going about their day properly in some society. Unless you went in and you actually asked them or you survey them long enough, you couldn't really tell if they were doing it because they loved the authoritative power or because they were afraid they were going to be imprisoned. I mean, you'd need to make reference to them. So pragmatically, it doesn't seem there's very much of a difference.
Right. All right. Well, I think we should end on that because our time is wrapping up, and we
All
definitely need to have Jasper back with maybe
Professor Anton. We can have you both on at once and sort out these issues.
That'd be good.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Adios.
Take
Take it easy.